Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Annual MIT CDOIQ Symposium. We are delighted to have with us here a seasoned professional, Maria Villar from SAP. Maria has been a CDO at SAP. Now she actually mentors fellow CDOs around the community, and she is here to talk with us today on session 10C on what makes an efficient data strategy. I would like to mention that during this session, Maria has asked for people to be interactive in the questions they ask and also the chat feature. So if you have got the capability to check on your right-hand side to make sure that you ask questions, post questions, which we will ask Maria towards the end, and obviously the chat feature. And so with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Maria. Maria, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. And again, welcome to the session on what makes an effective data strategy. Yes, I'm Maria Villar. And for the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through 10 tips of how to have an effective data strategy, but then more importantly, how having an effective data strategy accelerates the business outcome, the organization and business outcomes that your company is striving for, as well as your own personal outcome to drive that data transformation mission inside the organization. Now, as Robert said, I'm going to follow Dr. Wang's advice, and I really want to run this session more as an interactive session. I know it's a little hard when it's virtual, but what that means is I do encourage you to use the chat. Although I can't see it, I have asked alumni of the data strategy methodology that I'll talk about today to participate, so to self-identify and share their experiences. So I welcome questions, comments, other experiences to make this as interactive as possible. And again, as Robert said, I am going to ask some poll questions along the way. I did post the poll questions in our session and already got great participation, but for those of you that didn't have time to do it, I'm going to do it again, so that we get some real life feedback from the team on where you are. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Let's see.
Screen mode, yep, we're great.
Got it.
We're all good.
We're good to go. Okay, so look, before I jump into the tips on effective data strategy, I thought that I'd give you a little bit more about my background and my experiences, because frankly, those backgrounds and experiences are what have shaped the 10 tips that I'm going to share with you today. And, you know, again, I've been an EIM professional like yourselves for over 20 years. I've been that chief data officer 3 times, 3 different organizations, 3 different industries, 3 different size companies. A lot of the data challenges obviously were very similar as well. But each time I was that senior most executive that was responsible for the data agenda. And in all 3 cases, I was that first data executive, that first one that had to lay the groundwork for what the organization was really all about. And I was responsible broadly for just about every part of the organization. I've had some experience, whether it was the IT, whether it was the business, whether it was also the analytics, the strategy, the stewardship, all of that was in my purview in these roles. And I would say that I gained my share of badges and scars in those organizations, and certainly I got better with each one of these experiences, luckily for me. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you today is based on those personal experiences. But I'm also a member of the International Society of Chief Data Officers. I know they had a session right before that. I hope you got a chance to attend, but that gives me also the opportunity to continue to collaborate with my peers. At SAP, I've been with them for over since 2009, great company. I started as their first head of data. It was a global vice president role for enterprise data management. It reported to the COO of the organization. And I did that for 7 years, and that program was very successful. It really had a tremendous amount of business sponsorship, and we could show that we had driven a lot of business outcomes and business value from the program. And as a result, going back to the second bullet on my experiences, I was honored in 2017 by an award from my peers, both MIT and the ISCDO working together. They had some awards that they did that year. And the category of transforming from collaboration from inward to outward was the award that I was recognized for. And I'm very proud of that award, because even though my team and my organization had received awards in the past, this one was by my peers. And it was also about demonstrating collaboration with the business. Now, since 2017, I've taken on a new role, a customer-facing role, which has been fantastic and I really enjoy. But that's giving me also an opportunity to continue to work with not just CIOs and CDOs on their data programs and their data strategy, but I also get to talk a lot to CFOs, COOs, presidents, the board of companies. So I get their perspective as well as what they really think about this topic. And again, what's influenced what I'm going to show you today. Now, lastly, you see that I'm also a pretty prolific author and publisher. I've done that throughout my career, even in an operational role. I would say I probably was a frustrated teacher and all of my career. And so this has given me that opportunity to really develop those skills. In addition to writing some books and some online classes, I had a co-author, Teresa Kushner, for a book and classes. I've also written various articles in various publications. But what you should notice from those articles is over time, I've really developed the content to be a lot more than what is and how to do something to what does it need to be and how to change. So if I were to sum up my own career, what's influenced this topic for me, I've been an operational executive, that builder in organizations, certainly been this educator, trusted advisor, but now I really see myself as this champion for change. And champion for change, more about our own community as professionals in this space and how to be more effective in driving the change that we want. And the data strategy is that topic for me. So let's talk about what is the current state of the data strategy. And I like to use as facts for this is the recent survey by New Vantage Partners and Randy Bean, who's also on this conference. I like that survey because, first of all, they can trend it over time. They've been doing the survey since 2012. They have a very good representation of professionals, CDOs and CAOs who take the survey, so you know you're getting that voice. And also, again, it's broad, both public and private sector. Now, interestingly enough, this year they added a data strategy question, which is again starting to make the point about how important we all believe this topic is. The results are sobering. So when asked ourselves, do we have a well-articulated data strategy, 30% of us said that we do. Now, some other important points and conclusions from that survey is that 24% of us say they've created a data-driven organization, and 39.3% say they're managing data as an asset. So again, if a data strategy is that, by the way, when we're asked about our inhibitors and we're asked about our challenges, we say that the results are not because of technology. We all know the technology is the easy part. And so no surprise, we say it's the business alignment, it's the business process, it's the people, and it's the culture. And so I would argue that if the data strategy is that place where we're to identify all the capabilities that we need for success, both the business and the technical, as well as the organizational, and we're not driving the outcomes that we want, then either we're not building all the capabilities or we're not building them in the right way. So this is the first poll question that we had. And so I'm going to stop and let you answer the question exactly the way Randy Bean's Vantage Partner asked it. Do you have a well-articulated data strategy?
So Maria, what I'm going to do, if you just hang tight for the people on attendees on Hoover, you will see Maria speaking. She just put up her poll strategy in the video. If you'd like to just go to the right-hand side, you will see beside Q&A, you'll see polls. And under polls, it says this session 10C, and then you've got poll A. Do you have a well-articulated strategy? If you can just go ahead and just click on the answer. Now, Maria, while we give a couple of people a couple of minutes to answer, I will read out the current results that have been going through. So we have 219 answers so far. You're not going to believe this, but it's pretty evenly split at the moment. Sorry, it's just jumped up to 224. I can see people are answering, and it's still evenly split. We got 47% say yes, 53% say no out of 226, 227 answers now. So does that help you?
Good, that's good.
Answer?
Yeah, and that's quite an improvement from yesterday when I looked at it. It looked like we had quite a change. I mean, yesterday we had about a lot more yeses than no's. So it's good to get that new number.
Yeah, there's 231 at the end of this session. People can come back and see this, but I will give you those final results. And there is a delay between about a 21-second delay from when you put up the slide to when it actually goes on the Wrapup platform, just as an FYI. So back to you, Maria.
Okay, thanks for all that, Robert. So again, given what we've seen, we should really look at if we're missing capabilities or we're not effectively building them, then we should look at a different approach. And a different approach starts with a different strategy approach. And again, it's a strategy approach that I'm going to call the business outcome data strategy. And there are a lot alumni of that data strategy on this call. And I just ask you to use the chat session to identify yourself on that and to participate along the way. So I know some of you on this call are probably asking yourself right now, I don't really think I need a data strategy. Either I'm too small a company, or I think a data strategy is too big, it's too heavy. What I'm going to do is just have build data capabilities one project at a time, and the way that my stakeholders are asking me to do. And look, and while I've seen that this approach has some success, what I've also seen is that over time, that this tin cupping approach tends to fizzle out, and you're not going to be able to keep it sustainable. And when it starts to fizzle out, so does the data leader that goes with it. All the CDO surveys will tell you, and if you listen to the Gartner one yesterday as well, the most effective CDOs are those that think strategically, that think business outcomes. And again, to me, that means that you start with a strategy. Now, you don't want just any strategy. You don't want a document, multi-page document, hundreds of pages with lots of pictures and graphs. You want a data strategy that's going to be effective. But how would you know if it's effective? What do you look for? So the first criteria of effectiveness is your data strategy helps you get the funding and the resources that you need. Now, you want a funding not just at one project level, but at the program level. And you want that funding for at least a year, not just one project again. And also you want that expectation to be set that it's not just a one-year program. So getting the funding is a good indicator of success, but also getting approval to hire. Because oftentimes I see there's some money, but there's no people. So if you get both funded and resources, that's a very good indicator that your strategy is effective. And if you're not, I think it's time to go reevaluate your strategy approach. A strategy is effective if it's understood. Now, what does that mean? So an important part of your strategy is that it's a communication tool. It's a communication tool for your stakeholders, those that fund you, for your employees, and for your team as well. So if your data strategy is broadly understood, the value is understood, what it takes in terms of investment and the roles that they have to play, and also what you're not going to do, then that's another criteria for success. Now, this one is an interesting one. It has to create excitement and engagement. So how do you do that in the data strategy? How do you know? Well, first of all, if it's well understood and the value's been expressed in the right way, in the business term way, you do create that excitement in the business. And engagement means they continue to come to your meetings. They're not delegating those meetings 2 and 3 levels down in the organization. And also, more importantly, that as you ask them to take on the accountability for their roles and responsibilities, they do it. So if they're not engaged and they don't see the value, they're not going to be effective, and you're not going to be effective. Again, so it has to demonstrate business value. It has to be measurable and in business terms, not data terms. The strategy is a roadmap for the future, and that roadmap has projects. Those projects have to be achievable. They have to be funded, obviously, to be achievable, but also they're realistic. And also you're talking about what you're not doing, and you're showing success through the execution of those projects. And last but not least, it's guiding your project decisions. It's not a static document that's on the shelf. It's actually helping you to make those decisions project by project of what you should or should not be doing. So now we're going to take the next poll question. And now that I've sort of explained the criteria for success, I want you to now go back and identify, especially those that say they do have a well-articulated data strategy, which ones of the criteria do they see? So Robert, back to you.
Yes, thank you, Maria. So just as an FYI, the poll is poll B. Do you have a well-articulated data strategy? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 6 options that if you can go ahead and submit. Now, Maria, while we wait for the 20-second delay for people to get their responses coming in, which I am seeing, let me just give you kind of some of the answers, and it's like a poll race. So we've currently got 100 answers at the moment, with the leading answer at 30%, none of the above. Do you have a well-articulated data strategy? The second one coming in, and it's actually tied. Yes, it guides project decisions, or yes, it is funded and resourced. Those both seem to be tied. Yes, it's understood, coming in at 13%. Yes, it's achievable, coming in at 12%. And yes, it creates excitement and is engaging, coming in at 8%. And you got about 145 answers now, so that's given people the time to respond. So your topmost answer was none of the above, unfortunately. So at 33%. So does that help at all?
Yeah, absolutely. It justifies why we want to keep going.
Excellent. All right, back to you.
Okay, so now I'm going to get to these 10 tips. Again, these are going to be the 10 tips for an effective data strategy. I'm going to go through each one of them in more detail. But I wanted to also preface by telling you, you're going to find some of these tips to be controversial, but that's the point. You want to think about data strategy in a different way. And of course, some of them will be validating. All right, start with tip number 1, do your homework. Now, before you start having any data strategy discussions with your stakeholders and your IT team, you want to do your homework. You want to do your homework to understand your company's operating framework. You want to understand their priorities and their goals. What are they externally committing to the world, to their stakeholders, to their stockholders? And you want to understand that because you want to develop this data strategy point of view before you start having your discussions. You want to get smart on that so that you can lead a more effective data strategy session. So really the process is going to be, you want to review and listen. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that. And then you want to interview to validate and prioritize. Okay, so how would you go about doing this? What would be my recommendation? So again, You want to go to the external documents and the commitments that your organization is making. And why do I like to do that? I like to do that because, you know, as you're trying to justify your data strategy investments, you want to use the very words your company is using, so they're not debated. So the documents that I like to review is what's out there publicly. And oftentimes you can find these in the investor section of your public website, but also certainly Google is your friend here. I personally like the annual report. Now, if you all love reading annual reports, have at it. But I personally look at a couple of sections which are very business outcome driven. It's the CEO letter in the front that usually kind of summarizes your fiscal annual performance, but also addresses some of the future objectives. I also like to review the 10K, the management discussion usually, or even the risk factors at the end. Now, what I'm listening for, what I'm looking for is those business outcomes that are data centric. And you'll get better with it over time, but data-centric business outcomes are those that you know that there's going to be a lot of data work that has to go on in order to enable those outcomes. Those are where you want to really zero in on and validate in your processes. Now, I also will look at transcripts and interviews and listen to any interviews that maybe your executives are saying externally. I'll look at the corporate website. The About My Company is usually a good section too. And values or value proposition, also very good areas to zero in on and make sure you understand. Now, outside of what your company is saying, I also like to use the business model canvas. If you haven't used the business model canvas, of course, it's not available for every company. I provided the website there, but if it's available, you should take a look at it. It's a one-pager. You can see kind of what it looks like there on the right-hand side. That gives a high-level view of your company, the company's value propositions, its customers, its partners, its cost structure, its kind of revenue stream. If you can't find it for your company, at least maybe there's a competitor there as well that will give you a good sense of that. But all of that is going to give you another very good perspective about how your company kind of works that you can then bring into your data strategy. Now, again, once you have all of these documents that you've reviewed and listened, then you can go about the process of developing that initial point of view. So you're not bringing a blank sheet of paper to the discussion. You want to then start the interview process to validate and prioritize. And you're going to follow a process that I'll call the business outcome to business process to data discovery methodology. And again, this is something I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, but that's really the objective there. All right, here we go. So this is now tip number 2, develop a business outcome mindset. Now, I will tell you this is one of the hardest steps and tips that I'm going to talk about. And those of you that have been through this business outcome mind shift, please comment on your experiences. I would tell you it's the most transformational for yourself and for your organization. And once you have that business outcome mindset, it's hard to go back. And it's really a shift from a pain point mindset to this business outcome mindset. Now, traditionally, the way that we run these data strategy sessions with our stakeholders is we get all your stakeholders in a room and they are chomping at the bit to tell you every single data pain point that they have and how they want you to fix it. And usually that leads to a pile of pain points that you then have to do some sort of voting in order to prioritize the most popular ones and the ones you want to work on. And frankly, that can be both overwhelming. And to me, that's the wrong starting point. I feel a pain point is too reactive and it's too limiting. And not only that, but oftentimes you can alleviate a pain point, but you're not going to get the business outcome that you need because you've missed either other capabilities that have to be built. So you have to guide the conversation away from pain points into this business outcome mindset. And of course, you've done your homework, right? So you know what these business, you know how to guide that conversation. And I'm going to give you a good example of that. So oftentimes the way these sessions go is you start hearing things like, we need to be more flexible. The data team is too slow. We need to get more real-time data, or our data is too old. We have to drive to be data-driven, or we need to be cloud-based. I mean, those are typical words that come out in a data strategy session. And although they have their place, again, they're the wrong starting point. How do you even start with that? What attributes, where are you going to spend your time on this? You can make, you're going to make a lot of people unhappy if you don't address all of these, or set that expectation you're going to address all of them. So what you need to do is guide the conversation to be more business outcome driven. So you start asking questions like, well, why do we need to have real-time data? Do we need real-time data because we want to improve our inventory turn? Do we want more market data because we want to enter new markets? Do we need new analytics? Why do we need new analytics? Do we need more insights into reducing operating costs? I mean, those are the kinds of questions you should be asking to narrow the focus on the data, the capabilities that matter most and the outcomes that matter most. But you're also trying to identify, well, what data? Again, you could be flexible and real-time and data-driven and cloud-based, but all for the wrong data. So you want to drive this conversation back to business outcomes. And I've given you some examples of what are typical business outcomes. They're all measurable. You can have financial outcomes, outcomes about where your company sees growth. Is it through acquisition, through growing new markets, new businesses? You have customer outcomes, operational outcomes, and risk outcomes. Obviously, those are important as well. Now, again, by always redirecting these conversations back to outcomes, back to the bigger question of why do we need this, for what end, for what outcomes, you're starting that culture change inside your organization that you really need to see and drive. Okay, tip number 3. Again, this is going to feel a little bit more controversial as well. Don't have a data bias in your strategy. So what is a data bias? A data bias is a type of data strategy that's very focused on maybe one component or one capability. So for example, I have an analytics strategy, or I have a master data strategy, or even further refined, I have a customer master data strategy. How about I have only a security or privacy data strategy? Now, you're probably wondering, so what's wrong with that approach, right? That's pretty typical. Now, again, while I find that these bias-based strategies have their place, and they certainly can get funded and resourced, they're also contributing to the overall survey results that we're seeing about the importance of the organization understanding that data is an enterprise asset, and it's broader than in just one topic. How do we expect the organization that we're in to view data as a strategic enterprise asset when we're not doing it ourselves, when we're taking a siloed approach to how we deal with it? So I would argue that a bias-based strategy is less effective at communicating the complexity of managing data, certainly the need for investments, the value of it, and that really it's going to then drive those business executives to be a bit more confused, right? And maybe dissatisfied. Now think about it, right? These bias-based strategies oftentimes are dealing with exactly the same data. We're all dealing with the exact same data, but we're coming at it from different angles. So we have different requirements, different classifications, different investment decisions. Yet we're all going to the same set of business people, asking them to invest in us. And that puts the organization or the business people to make those priority decisions for us, and to then look at, which ones are more important to invest in and which ones aren't. We'd be better served if we were to not have any biases. So again, the other confusion that I see is, that they may miss, if you only have one bias, in your strategy, it could miss some important capabilities. And that would then again lead to some business frustration with the data program. So let me give you an example. Let's say your CFO, their business outcome that's very important to them is they want to improve working capital. Well, if you have only an MDG data strategy, or even yet maybe it's only a customer master data strategy, you're going to work on only that one sliver of the working capital problem. But the CFO also needs better analytics. Maybe they need to have some account receivable issues addressed as well. Again, by focusing on that bias, you're only solving one aspect of the problem, which then will lead to some frustration and maybe some issues with the funding for the MDG strategy again for next year. So again, by replacing these biases, and they will have their role, but not as a starting point with the business outcome, with a business outcome bias, you're now more on a path of being effective with your stakeholders. So what is a business outcome data strategy and how is it different? Well, first of all, it addresses all data that you need to achieve the business outcomes. Again, it's still focused because it's focused on outcomes that matter. So you're not talking about all data for everything. You're all focused on those outcomes that matter. And that means the master data, the transactional, the reference data, the analytic data, the data that you need for AI or ML, or the external data that you're going to need. And it's all capabilities. So it's not just the technical capabilities, but what are the business capabilities that you have to drive? What are the operational capabilities that you have to drive all around those outcomes, those collection of outcomes that you've prioritized? And by business capabilities, this is where you identify the organizational structure and the policies and the accountability model that you need. But you use those outcomes to base your decisions. And the reason why that's powerful is then when you go back to your organization to sell the organizational model or the accountability model, you have a clear reason of why. Why do we have to do this? Because it's these outcomes needed. So again, using those outcomes is a very powerful way to get the engagement that you need. And you see that the operational capabilities includes them all, right? But the compliance requirements, the analytic requirements, the data quality. So it's not that we're excluding them. Again, we're putting them in the context of a business outcome. So tip number 4, know the business and process data connection. Now, in the world of data, we all know, especially us as data people, we know that business processes depend on data. It is the language of business processes. It is the way business processes talk to each other, whether it's manual or digital, frankly. But the connection between data and process is not always understood, and certainly not understood by business executives or sometimes even the process owners. I've experienced that myself. And so that's part of the value that you bring to the organization, certainly to the data strategy process, is that you hear with data ears what is important from a business process perspective. But you sometimes have to educate yourself on that, and you should do it ahead of time. And I would say this was something that wasn't inherently clear to me either until it became very obvious that my business stakeholders were saying, hey, we're tired of you giving us data quality metrics. What we want to know is what can we do differently because of all the data quality work that you've done. So get educated on this business and process connection, because you're going to help to drive those data strategy discussions better when you do. So again, I've talked about this business outcome discovery methodology now a little bit. So let me give you more detail. It's a 4-step process, and they come in logical order. So the first one is what we've talked about, identifying those business outcomes that matter from your external documents. But now you've got to scope that more. You've got to get to the data that matters and the data requirements and capabilities that matter. Now, what I found that it's very difficult to get from that high level business outcome down to the data level and the data strategy implication if you don't take this business process step first, right? So the business process is really where you're going to then make that connection. And you ask yourself, for those business outcomes that matter, what are the business processes that are going to have to materially change? And then those business processes will then tell you the data that needs to be enabled and the capabilities that need to be enabled. Also, the business process is the way often organizations are set up. So you can more logically find the data experts and the process experts. So as an example, let's say that one of the business outcomes from your organization, from your annual report, is that you want to improve the operating margin by 10% year over year. Well, in order to execute on that goal, you're going to probably go to, and there's probably initiatives already underway, where the larger operating cost areas of your company are looking at what they need to do to reduce those operating margins. And for example, if you're manufacturing, it would probably be manufacturing, or maybe it be your supply chain. So you as the data team are going to work with those process experts in manufacturing and in supply chain to understand what is the data that most materially affects your cost? What analytics would you need in order to be able to get that insight that you need? If you want to reduce your operating costs and your operating processes, then what data is very significant for that? Do you need AI or ML? Do we want to automate? So you see how expansive that conversation can now become. And it is a way then to focus on the critical data that you need in order to execute on those outcomes. And not only that, but then the data strategy implications, those capabilities that we talk about. Is there process improvements, data quality improvements? Do I need, what's the architecture that goes with it, the security and the compliance, right? But all again within the context of that methodology. Now, here's another cheat sheet here, and I don't mean to be all inclusive, but to give you another example of how you get yourself tooled up to become this data business process expert, is I've given you some pretty typical L1, L2 business processes and the data that's most important to them. Now, again, if you have your own business processes documents, please use those, industry experts or industry processes. But this is what I mean. So for example, I'm going to give you 3 examples. If you're a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer, and your business outcome is that you want to improve campaign targeting, campaign effectiveness, then you're going to want, as the data person, to work on contact data, right? That's obvious. You want to improve that. But also opt-in becomes very important. You want a higher number of opt-in, but that's a business process transformation that probably the data team is not going to only be able to do on their own. But you want to identify that as an important data field that also needs remediation. On order to cash, suppose you're head of manufacturing and you want to improve days sales outstanding in your manufacturing process, then oftentimes an important data field is payment terms. If you have too many of them, it can elongate your accounts receivable. So reducing the number of payment terms reduces the contract time for closure, and you can have a faster DSO turnaround. If any of you have done payment term transformation, you know that, again, that's more than data quality. It's a business process transformation that, again, requires multiple capabilities to be built. And then the last example would be procure to pay. Someone in supply chain, let's say they want to speed up, there's some invoice delays and invoicing inefficiencies. Oftentimes, tax ID has issues, and so does your back information. But you see what I mean? You start really understanding and familiarizing. As I make improvements in these areas, I should see these business outcomes as well. And so you're guiding those discussions in those strategy sessions. Now, again, tip number 5, measure with business value metrics, not data metrics. And I'm going to start going a little bit faster, make sure we have time for Q&A. Again, having business value metrics is the way you get that excitement, that engagement. It works, it's measurable. I've done it myself. You can use some general business value metrics like employee productivity or process time improvements or TCO. Those are often used. But again, if you're using business outcomes as your starting point, you want to also track the business outcomes along with the data improvements that you want with it. So again, working capital, whether that be master data improvements, but also show the correlation between that and others like supplier spend or day sales outstanding. So those are some typical metrics that you can use. Okay, so poll question number 3. This one had some interesting answers yesterday. Do you currently demonstrate ROI from your data and analytic investment? Okay, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. Poll 3 is question C, the second one from the top. So please make sure you go ahead and select poll C, which says, do you currently demonstrate ROI from your data and analytics investment? And so let me just go through and tell you the results. So results before today. And by the way, Maria, your attendance has been just clicking and counting up like crazy, as has your chat window been focusing on that as well. So
awesome.
Answers are coming in rapidly. We're up to 126. And that is continuing to accelerate. The most popular answer by at least almost 50%, 47, 48, 49%, is that we plan on it, with a yes at a 21% and a no at 33%. So most of them are planning on it, and you ended up with 152 direct answers. So hopefully that comes back to you. And just an FYI, Maria, we're at 12:13, so we've got about 16, 17 minutes left.
Yeah, so we do want to pick it up a little bit, maybe not spend as much time on the poll, Robert,
Sure.
so that we can get to the Q's and A's. All right, tip number 6, speak with one data voice. So if you're committed to a data strategy without bias, then having no data, having a one data voice is really a requirement. But what are the data voices in your company? Let's just spend a minute and you reflect on how many do you have in your organization. In the beginning, it used to be just the CIO who's the data voice, and then came the CDO. But now I see a proliferation of data voices, whether that's the digital officer, the chief architect, the chief analytic, the chief analytic officer, the chief information. And by the way, many of you are on this call because I was able to see your profile. So many voices here. And so my advice to you is you want to make sure that a data strategy document has these perspectives that can be told in the context of those business outcomes. So why is that? Why? What's important about that? Well, what's important is that, with one data voice, you're really communicating more effectively and demonstrating, again, that data is an asset. You're combining and being able to articulate to the business, which again, they're not the data experts, we are. What are the combined set of risk and values and classifications for that same data? So you want to be able to articulate for that same data, the risk. There's quality risk, there's security risk, there's legal risk, there's ethics risk. The values could be monetized value, strategic value, operational value. Classifications is a perfect one, right? We've got CDEs for CDOs, but we've got PII, and we've got the security classifications. Again, all for the same data type. So really being able to combine that view gives the executives a better appreciation and to be able to make better trade-off decisions about those assets. And then, of course, you want to look at what are some shared services that you can do together. There's no need to have multiple catalogs, multiple discovery tools, multiple data quality tools. That's not where we're going to add the value. Look at sharing those investments, employee training and change management. Those are like my pet peeves. Wouldn't it be more effective for employees to understand all their data responsibilities, not piecemeal? And then again, having shared oversight and accountability for these data services. That doesn't mean that each of these biases and voices can't do their own projects, but they do it in the context of the bigger data strategy. Number 7, now this is where we start to get to a few of these sort of more not controversial, but certainly not something that's obvious in a data strategy. So we all know this, right? That culture eats strategy for lunch. So get a lot of friends. In the world of data, again, you're always going to have to make these trade-off decisions. you're not going to make everybody happy. You're trying to take an enterprise view versus a functional view. And so that's why you need that executive sponsor. That executive sponsor provides the air cover for yourself, and the engagement of the peers, the modeling of the behaviors is a tremendously important role. We all know that. But I also will tell you need lots of friends, and whether we call them partnerships or I like to call them friends of data, but they need to be at the table with you. And a friend of data could be not just other executives, they could be those other data voices, they could be influencers in your company, but you need lots of them. And the other reason is that oftentimes executive sponsors come and go, and they go because they're good and they go off to another job. And so oftentimes if you're just riding on one executive sponsor and they leave, the data program is at risk. So again, you have lots of friends. The way you can get those friends is because you have a business outcome, a very fair approach to your decision-making process, and they can see reasonable, fair decisions being made. Okay, poll question number 4, and Robert, we're going to do this really quickly, right? What sponsorship do you have relative to your data strategy? And I'm going to keep going while people do the rest of the polling.
Yep, that'd be great. I'll read out the answers as you continue on.
Yep. Okay, tip number 8, another one that's not going to feel as it's part of your normal data strategy conversation, but you want to build personal and organizational credibility. Again, think about our personal lives, where unfortunately we've got this whole topic of fake news, right? Things that there are facts and figures that can be told, but if you don't believe the person or the organization that's telling them, it doesn't matter what numbers you use. So you have to build that credibility in your organization. And how do you do that? Well, you say what you do and you do what you say, frankly, right? You want to have those quick wins. Those are obvious. You want to show project results against those roadmaps and make sure you communicate that. But you also want to be known as a fair thinker and an enterprise thinker. And I think the biggest compliment that I got in my career was when someone said, Maria, we know you don't have a personal agenda. We know that you're doing this for what's right for the company. And that establishes that brand and that credibility for yourself.
And just Maria,
yep.
The results of the poll are in. A big 57% have got some kind of CXX business executive sponsorship.
That's excellent. That's what I saw yesterday. So that's really good. Okay, tip number 9, tell a compelling data story. So again, we talked about the metrics and those are important, but can you weave those metrics to tell a compelling story? And I would recommend first decide the story that you want to tell, right? Is it going to be faster, cheaper, better, more innovative, whatever that is, because that'll help you to establish those metrics that matter. And you want a baseline. You want a baseline as soon as possible, what those metrics are going to be. Then you want to track it at a yearly level, yet track it at a project level, track it in a combined way. Trend it is really powerful. So we were able to say at SAP, have we delivered 70 million euros worth of benefit over the life of the program. That was a powerful one statement to make as opposed to individual. Use personal stories where you can, customer testimonials, employee testimonials. And then lastly, and really important, have a branding campaign. Now, a branding campaign is more than a literacy program or a change management program. Think of the tagline almost that you want for your organization. At SAP, we started off with one SAP for data quality. That was our tagline. We had a branding campaign. We had someone from marketing helping us on it. And it's one of those lessons that I wish I had done earlier because it did absolutely propel that organizational awareness for the topic at the employee level. And lastly, keep your data strategy relevant. So your data strategy has to be a living document. Obviously, you need to reevaluate it every year. You have to evaluate, are there new business outcomes because the business is changing? Do I have new data capabilities I need to be adding, like possibly AI or ML to some of my existing capabilities? And also, you want to make sure that you keep it relevant for your employees. They want to work on things that matter, right? And you need to reprioritize possibly every year. I mean, that happened to me at SAP when we hadn't considered an M&A, the M&A capabilities, and then it became really important because that was the thread that we were on. You know, one of the ways that you stay relevant is in this decision that your company may have to move to the cloud. Now, I could spend a whole hour just on that, but I'm not going to do that today. If you can see in purple, I have released a document, a white paper on what does it mean to manage data in the cloud, and from the CDO audience's perspective, because I think as a CDO, you've got to work very closely with your IT organization, and it's not a one size fits all. You really have various dimensions of the cloud strategy that you have to evaluate. You've got to look at, am I managing master data in the cloud, especially if it's a multi-cloud, multi-PAS kind of set of strategy? Or am I managing cloud warehouses in a cloud infrastructure, which is the typical way we think about it? Or am I managing third-party data providers? Data marketplaces and data exchanges are just proliferating, and it's making that acquisition much more important, but also something for the CDO to consider. So in all those three cases, you want to reevaluate your capabilities with your data voices and your IT team. And you want to consider, of course, obviously, what is the role of the cloud provider in the data process, the data lifecycle process, in the data risk management? Would it be in the security and anonymization and all that? You know, in data quality, do they have new data services that I can take advantage of? And usually all these cloud providers have data services like marketplaces to evaluate. So there's some general things that you want to look at. And then within each case, you also have some uniqueness that you should consider. For example, in managing master data in the cloud, an important question that the CDO needs to ask is, well, am I going to allow the federation of data fields in all of these cloud applications? And that will be the trusted source, or am I going to bring all those sources in and have a central MDG? That's a really important new strategic consideration. So is things like PII management, right, in a master data context. If you're managing cloud data warehouses, then what are those trusted sources? What is the catalog that you want to do? You're going to have new and interesting kinds of data types. What's the data quality that I'm going to have for real-time data or IoT data? Those are some unique considerations. Again, if you're managing third-party data in the cloud, and there's been some great sessions on that today in the forum, the thing I would ask you to consider is that third-party data is going to be much more important than it's ever been for all of us. And though we've all done this in the past, acquired data, with these marketplaces and these exchanges, it's allowing us to do it in a much more efficient way, but it's also going to have to be some decisions that you're going to have to make. Which marketplace do you use for what if they're all available to you? So CDO has to consider that. I would also recommend that you start to consider a head of data acquisition. So our guest speaker this morning certainly made the point about how important a data acquisition strategy and framework is in the context of an overall data strategy. That was one of the data types you want to consider. And so those are some of the things you really want to think about as you think about the cloud, much more in that white paper. So look, just in wrapping up, and that will give me then about 5 minutes for Q&A, Robert, which is great. So do your homework, look for those business outcomes that matter. And use that as a starting point for your data strategy discussions. Develop that mindset. Get away from that pain point mindset as your starting point. Start with no data biases. Eventually, those capabilities and biases will be included in your strategy, but start with removing that from your terminology and identify all data and all capabilities that matter. Know the correlations between process and data so that you can guide those discussions. Speak with business speak and value speak, not data metrics. Partner with your data voices so that you create one consolidated data strategy and roadmap. Don't just get an executive sponsor. Number 7, get lots of friends. Build your own and your organization's credibility through results. Tell a compelling data story of outcomes to your stakeholders, and stay relevant and keep your organization up to date, looking at it every year at a minimum. Okay, So thank you, everyone. It's been great sharing this session with you and your participation. And Robert, we got 4 minutes, I guess, right?
4 minutes. So let me just quickly say that whilst we will not get through all of the questions because we've got 16 questions and counting, however, Maria is going to receive all the questions and going to receive the people who attended her session. So if you do want to post a question and it doesn't get to it, Maria will be able to follow up with you. So Maria, in the most popular order, let's start with the ones that I can get out. Number one, defining a data strategy and standing up a centralized data management practice is complex and challenging in a so-called normal situation. What advice do you have for companies in merger and acquisition scenarios?
Well, look, I think merger and acquisitions is a great business outcome to start a data strategy and data program with. So I would use that again to start my data program, because that requires a whole new set of data capabilities, making sure that the data is brought into the company correctly, that you've got the right data accountability within the organization. So it's a good business outcome to start with and identify going through that process. You know, what are if you're going to do an M&A, what are the processes that materially need to change? And then how do we enable those processes with the right data and data capabilities?
Thanks, Maria. Next question. Many data strategies end up as technical in nature or a data or analytics strategy versus a true differentiating data strategy. What advice can you share to avoid one of these data strategy dead ends?
Well, gosh, I mean, that's the whole premise of what I've spent the whole hour on. And that requires the data leader or a data strategy champion to really understand that they need to drive business outcome strategy, and that you've got to start with business outcomes that matter, and then let that guide the rest of your, organizational strategy. But again, it requires a mindset and a partnership. So a mindset change from that data strategy champion to look at that strategy in a collective way, and then partnership from the data voices to see the value of having that strategy and that point of view versus doing everything on their own.
Next question. How do you balance flexibility in your data strategy to addressing challenging business needs while still holding true to building a sustainable and scalable foundation?
Well, look, that's the judgment call that you have to make. But if you've got the North Star, which is in your data strategy, and you know where you want to go, then along the way, hey, maybe you have to do something tactical, but it doesn't do harm. And so those of you that have been with some of my sessions before, I call it the do no harm strategy, which is sometimes you just have to do some stuff because it's important, but you've got to make sure you do it in the context of what you have to do. You can it's not going to make a tremendous risk to the organization, and if it does, then maybe that's where you have to raise your hand and say no.
So Maria, we are unfortunately out of time. It is 12:30 Eastern. But however, what we will do is these questions, of which there were 17 in total.
Wow.
We've gone through the first, and they were in priority order that I read them off. Your team has also been excellent on the chat community as well.
Awesome team. Thank you.
I'll send you a copy of the chat. I'll send you a copy of the questions. I'll also let you know who attended your session. And with that, it just comes back to me to thank you for your gracious time today. It is always a pleasure, and we look forward to your continuing support of the symposium and the society. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks, everybody.